Timeless, the human experience through a quantum lens. Hello and welcome back to Timeless, a podcast with me, Isabel Soden.
I'm Clive Hyland.
Episode 3, we are talking about neuroscience.
Mm-hmm. Is that it?
Yeah, that's my work done for today.
Oh, okay,
Off
so
you go.
you put your feet up now and I'll be okay. All right. Yeah, so the context was very much how do we bring the most recent information to the table in our conversations about exploring human nature and the nature of the universe, which are inseparable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But today we're going to focus on neuroscience, on what has it told us, particularly in the last 20, 30 years, about the way that the brain works. And for me, I use a model which is, I think, a very helpful starting place for people, because the brain is an incredibly complex organ that we have, more complex than anything else we're aware of in the universe, consisting of 100 billion neurons that can connect between 10,000 to 100,000 times each. So if and intelligence is driven really by connectivity. It's the more connections they got, the more forms of intelligence and, modes of intelligence that you can work with. So,
do you mean neural connections?
Yeah, in this particular place. So, the way that these neurons can connect up with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that, explaining an organ like that is obviously quite a job. Right? So to start with a model that represents that in a reliable way is a nice place to start. Mm-hmm. And so the model that I talk about with brain systems is about instincts, emotions, and two forms of thought, rational thought and reflective thought. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice way of untangling so much of what we try to understand in a day-to-day living of life sense, where we mix all those things up. We're not really terribly aware of, was that an instinctive reaction or emotional reaction or, rational or reflective. Okay? Yeah. So the starting point is to say, okay, let's work out what is really going on here. What are the dynamics that drive our responses? Because focusing on behavior, the stuff above the surface of the iceberg, right, that's just the outcome of all the other stuff that goes on.
Okay, yeah. And
just to, put a bit of science around this, we can be quite precise about the timings. So it's not an opinion as to what operates more quickly than the rest. It's more about, being quite precise about the speed at which these parts of the brain light up, in scanning conditions when we feed certain stimuli into the brain. So we can pinpoint the sequence of activity. And instincts are undoubtedly the fastest, okay, which is natural. It's going back to our evolutionary status as reptilians. The first job was one of survival. We had to work out, were you in danger or not, and what you had to do to react if you saw that danger, or indeed if you sensed an opportunity, like the opportunity for a kill, which is still a part of the survival, mechanism. Yeah. So, and then came along emotions, which are slower, but still incredibly fast. And we talk about emotions, whereas instincts register about 70 milliseconds in the brain. Emotions register at around about 80 milliseconds. So that's thousandths of a second in the brain. But it's important to have that as a bedrock of our understanding, because when we recognize that they're the oldest parts of the brain and they operate most quickly, then, for instance, it is a nonsense to believe we've got any sort of ultimate control over our emotions. They operate much more quickly. Okay. Now, there's lots of other things about emotions, but we can't cover everything. But then, at the human level, so whilst emotions really, are part of our mammalian development, and the development of social groups and bonds and relationships, collaboration and all that stuff. At a human level, then, what really kicked on with our evolution was the ability to think. And the essence of thinking is actually to slow down the processing speed of the brain. And that's so counterintuitive for people, because people automatically assume that thoughts are the quickest, but they're not. Okay, and there's a reason for that. And the reason in evolutionary term was that by slowing down the processing of that information in the brain, we could collect more information and therefore introduce options, which means choice. See, there is no choice about our instincts or our emotions. They just happen. It's driven by sensory intelligence, where we sense in our environment and we react. And obviously, as mammals and reptiles, we would have to do that.
Yeah.
But as human beings, we have this further layer of intelligence, which is called thoughts. And that has enabled us through evolution to develop very complex responses to sensory intelligence that comes up through the body.
Yeah.
Okay?
Putting my hand
You don't
up.
have to put your hand up. It's a podcast.
It doesn't read well. Free will.
Yeah.
Is that, the rational reflective, is that a sort of departure into free will that humans have beyond animals and reptiles? Or is that a bigger philosophical question
It's
that
a much
is not
bigger
one
question.
for neuroscience?
Oh, no, there is a neuroscience view on that,
Yeah.
undoubtedly. Okay, so the neuroscience view is that free will could be a bit of an illusion, but there is nevertheless a huge evolutionary debt to having our own sense of agency. So what that means is we perceive that there's free will, and that's vital, because if we don't think we can control anything, we're not going to do anything about things. We're just robots. Right? So that limits our response, our evolutionary ability to sustain and survive. So it's very important that we believe that we have free will, because we believe that we can then do something about our circumstances.
But the point of importance is that we think we have it, and whether we do
Absolutely.
or not is by the by.
Well, it's not by the by, but we'll talk about it more when we get into consciousness.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we'll talk more about that. But undoubtedly, it has served a very important evolutionary role for us. Okay. But back to the thinking.
Yes.
So what I wanted to do then was split it into rational and reflective thinking. Okay. And for this simple context that we're dealing with now, rational thinking is all about getting things done, but much more complicated things. As I said, we can be hijacked by our instincts and emotions, right? But this is about thought processes where we introduce choice. And the complexity of our choice, is significantly beyond any other animals, all right, as far as thought processing is concerned. But the brain itself is predictive. So we are always anticipating what's happening next, and we build strategies for dealing with that. Right? But things don't always go to plan. So we need another part of the brain that sort of oversees the whole process and is the change part of the brain. And that's the bit that looks at the bigger picture, so that when something goes wrong, we can step back, take the bigger picture, which takes longer then because we need more information. Okay, so whilst rational thinking comes in at about 250 milliseconds, this what we call reflective thinking comes in at 420 milliseconds.
Wow.
Okay,
and the quickest bit is 70 minutes.
70, yeah. So if we play that out, right, so things like imagination would sit very much in the reflective space. And I think if you take a little while to think about that, it makes sense, because we're collecting more information from more sources to put it together. But instinctive reactions are incredibly quick, because originally as reptiles, we couldn't take half a second that could cost us our lives. We have to get on with things, make our minds up quickly. If a bus is veering off towards the pavement that you're walking on, it's not a good time for thinking about, as the driver had a good day. It's much more about what have I got to do to get out of here, to protect myself. But further relatability, I think, comes to things like, one of my bugbears that we touched on before is I dislike the level of polarization that exists in society between, different sorts of beliefs, between religion and science and spirituality and something else, so on and on it goes. Okay. One of the reasons for that is the instinctive brain. So whilst it's there to protect us, the very first thing it will do is look out for, are you my tribe or somebody else's tribe? Okay. So it's that first thought which says, should I be afraid of you, or am I okay with you?
Yeah.
All right. Now, at that level, and we still make those decisions, we still have an absolute tendency to decide, is somebody in the safe basket or in the threat basket? Yeah. And that then has a huge impact on the information that we look for thereafter to determine how we deal with the response. Because once the instinctive brain is engaged, it's like a crocodile, it charges through, it explodes in, and it changes the oxygenated blood supply in the brain, which means that the die is already cast and what we're going to be looking for in making sense of the situation. The reason I say that's relatable is because it explains why we are often hung up with who's right and who's wrong. Because we start making that decision within the first 70 milliseconds of our brain's reaction.
So our perception of other people sits in that reptilian instinctive part.
As the
of our
starting
brain.
point, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, our challenge then is like recognizing that's going on. So why is it we're more inclined to believe some people more than others? Okay. What's happening at that very instinctive level, which creates connection and trust or not? And sometimes that's going to be right. So I'm not saying ignore it, okay, because it's basically built on our experience. But sometimes it'll be wrong. And when we find ourselves in situations where we've not handled something as well as we could have, and we've been honest with ourselves about that, then it's very useful to go back and think, well, at what level was I wrong? Was my thinking wrong about it? Was I emotionally wrong? Or was I just instinctively put myself in the worst possible position to start with? That make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. So it's really the interplay between
Yeah, exactly
those
that.
four systems.
Because we analyze behavior, and I understand why, because it's just classic with our preoccupation with the material world, right? We have to focus on what we see. Yeah, I get that. But behavior itself is a response to all the other stuff that happened first. And when we were talking about the physics community, matter itself is a response to everything else that happened first at the energetic level.
Yes. So this is the same pattern of perception. We're doing it again.
It is. Yeah. It's and again, not knocking ourselves. We haven't been stupid. It's just what we knew, right? But now we should know the things are not working.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where's our next level of intelligence going to come from? And part of it is from just looking into ourselves, because we've been so preoccupied with our external worlds that we've done very little to transform our internal worlds. We've tried, but, we haven't got very far as yet.
But the scientific tools, advanced enough for us to be able to get a scientific glimpse into our internal world.
Yeah, they're insights, so they won't spell out solutions to us because it's too early. I think in our understanding of the brain and certainly our understanding of the universe. But to me, at least it says don't put all your eggs in the one basket of rational science. Yeah. Yeah, because we know that is only at best half a story. So what about the rest of the story? Where are we going to look for the rest of that story? And that's, what we're talking about, whether it's from a physics or from a neuroscience perspective. You're opening up our minds to the other stuff that, there are insights available now, and we should be tuning into that. And we should be trying to stop all this racing round in terms of the preoccupation with the material world and give ourselves space to open up our internal world.
So neuroscience in terms of the brain... Is that where our neuroscientific exploration will end?
Absolutely not.
I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, it would have been very quiet, wouldn't it? It's no good material, is it, for a podcast? Silence. No. So, where that leads is to the whole concept of body intelligence, so below that, energetic intelligence. But let's stick with easy stuff first. So,
he says easy stuff.
Yeah. Maybe that was a joke. No, maybe not.
Keep trying.
Yeah, okay. Keep plugging away. So, so when we're dealing with body intelligence, we now know that there's a complex, somatic sensory system that runs through the body. Every cell in the body is an intelligence system. Okay, and that sounds weird, but it is, because it has to sense what's going on in the bloodstream, for instance, whether there are toxins in the bloodstream or whether there are nutrients, because it has to react differently to those. So it's not like intelligence only sits in certain parts of the body. Intelligence does not just sit in the brain. It sits right across our whole existence, right? And not only material, beyond that, but let's stick with the material for now. So we have a very sophisticated body intelligence system, which consists of primarily the senses that we're all aware of, sight and sound and all that stuff, and equally the emotional sensory experience that is embodied within us. You know, we feel our emotions in the body, don't we? We don't feel our thoughts in the body, but we feel our emotions there. So, and broadly, the way that it's work is the brain. You cannot operate independently of the body, and that's one of the challenges for AI. Another debate another day. But in essence, the brain relies on the information coming from the body about its environment and then works out how to respond. Mm-hmm. Okay, so there are different tiers in the brain where there's a part of the brain called the insula, which is where this somatosensory intelligence is received in the brain. And then we have intelligence sort of coming down from the thinking layers, which interprets that intelligence and works out how we respond. But if you took away that intelligence, we wouldn't be humans. Mm-hmm. You know, because it's the foundational information that we work with and then work out how we respond. So that throws up some very interesting challenges. So number one is we need to be much more in touch with our bodies. Okay. And in particular, the intelligence that our body is offering us that we just don't listen into enough. Yeah. And of course, that can take us into a meditative state or a spiritual state. So it's a point of possible convergence. Yeah. So listening to our bodies, but also then there's this whole principle about when people talk about mind, usually people's assumption, the mind operates around the brain. I would argue the mind operates around the whole brain and body.
Right.
So the brain and body are the biological machinery of our mind, but our mind is not necessarily the same thing. But that's something we're going to leave hanging until we get into consciousness.
Oh, I'm really glad because my brain.
I'm not going to tell you now. Yeah, no, we just need a bit more information to get the most out of that debate, you know. But that's the essence of it. Is even with our current today's understanding of mind, then we are wrong to exclude the body.
Yeah,
you know, we are biology, and we're energy, and we need to understand how those domains meet and work together.
Yeah, but I mean, as we know, working together, we have a constant discourse about how to bring the whole being into a room, into a space of learning, not just the brain.
Totally.
You know, the attitude that this you know, the body is something that transports the brain from place to place, and you know, necessarily needs fed and watering every now and then and let out for a run. But actually, the whole system as one, and how we can treat that, because I feel really strongly personally that our well-being suffers when we make that disassociation between mind and body.
Well, yeah, I mean, the way I like to think of it is like there are, you know, the intelligence system in the whole unit called a human being, you know, is hugely impacted by the brain, the heart, and the gut. So the heart and the gut are big players. And certainly when we get into experiences like confidence, the difference between confidence and not being confident. We are confident when the brain, the heart, and the gut are synchronized, when they're aligned and believe in the same things, right? And we are, when we're out of balance, we are at least suboptimized or possibly into some state of ill health or anxiety. You know, so synchronization around what's going on in the body and aligning it with what's going on in the brain is a key part of maintaining homeostasis, which is basically a place of biological balance where things are as they're meant to be. You know, anxiety is a state where we pulled out of balance. Excitement is a state where we pulled out of balance, you know, which is why excitement is temporary, but it's a motivator, of course. But it's like we always need to keep dropping back to this default position where everything, the engine's just ticking over, you know, and that is absolutely a brain and body type synchronization activity. And yet we rarely understand that. And, you know, a classic example would be where we're in denial about, you know, needing help, for instance, or, you know, we are so habitual about the way that we have to appear positive, we almost convince ourselves that we are positive. You can fool the thinking parts of the brain, but you cannot fool the body. The heart has to deal with the reality of the hormones that are being released, you know, in the body. So there's an honesty about the body that is well worth protecting and trying to gaze into on occasions, because that's where our human reality is, not what we always tell ourselves in the brain. And when we can get those things synchronized and we're actually telling ourselves what's really happening, we're in a state of well-being.
Yeah.
In a real place, and belief, gravitas and all those things, because we're using all of us. We are a complete individual, whereas anxiety and all the negative stuff separates us internally, and our systems don't coordinate, they don't synchronize, and you can, at worst in the brain, you can go into psychosis, and different voices speaking in the head. It's stress is a form of separation, whereas well-being is all about synchronicity and bringing things together. That was a good one, wasn't it?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm purring.
Yeah. Who needs words? Yeah. Just throw a few noises my way, right?
I'm here for just gentle
sound
effects.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I love that.
Don't know where to go now, do you?
Well, I mean, I have a little note here on neurodiversity.
Yeah, good point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I there is no seamless segue, just more purring.
Yeah. It's yeah. Well, I mean, let's take one step back first of all, and our understanding of the human brain has been hugely enhanced by when the brain doesn't work as it's supposed to. Okay, and that can be at a real biological level, or things like split brain surgery and things like that, where you have to save a person's life or experience really through, separating parts of the brain because, for instance, the level of seizures that they're having is the only way to control it. Okay, so and what we have found is that the brain is incredibly powerful and clever at recovering things it loses. Right. So it's got this great regenerative ability to bounce back. And if it loses something, it'll find another way of getting the information. Okay. But, without too much depth on that. So basically where that takes us is the point that we can bounce back and recover. Yeah. So once it starts with things like split brain surgery in the neurodiverse space, it's now very noticeable that there are a lot of people that are battling with either diagnosed or self-diagnosed conditions of a neurodiversity and anxiety disorders. Right? Now, my own view of that can't be backed up with the science yet, but there are pointers there, is that that's symptomatic of sensory overload in our brains. The level of information that we are now trying to deal with in terms of external change in our environments is like no other species has ever experienced, including humanity itself, earlier stages of. And our brains can't cope with that. Yeah. And my suspicion is that our brains are getting bent out of shape in order to try and cope with this. And we have natural mechanisms in the brain that allow us, for instance, to moderate emotions, key interfaces in the brain, to do with the temporal lobe and parietal lobe and things like that. But basically, they're there to help us, moderate life and just continue to be able to make sense of what's going on.
Yeah.
But when that's constantly flooded by information around change, and change requires more energy in the brain, rather than using the current networks. And when it's exacerbated by things like, especially youngsters with developing brains and social media, where they're bombarded, whether it's a person in an organizational context being bombarded by too much information, or the child is being bombarded with the wrong sort of information. The reality is that our brain's ability to cope with that is getting stretched.
Yeah.
I know there's something like probably 1 or 4 in people that diagnose as being around neurodiverse or anxiety conditions. Yeah. So, and it's only going to get worse. It's because that is the direction that we've pointed to ourselves. Now, understanding how the brain has reacted to that, again, is a very useful insight, and is telling us that things shouldn't be this way. And our view of normal is going to change and has to change because of the environments we've created. Yeah. What I really dislike about our treatment of neurodiverse conditions is, again, this polarization. As though there is there's a group of so-called normal people and a group of different people. That's, it's often called worse than that, but I don't even like using the term. So basically, it's like typical, untypical, and a big gap in the middle. It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
The truth is there is a spectrum, and we're all a bit untypical.
Yeah.
We've all got the odd bit of obsessive behavior or experience anxiety or mood swings, all the classic things, social engagement issues, all the things that are suffered on a bigger level, on a higher level for neurodiverse people, but are nevertheless now a part of a fairly typical human condition.
Yeah.
It's not that we're totally different. It's just we're at different points on the scale. Yeah.
But it speaks again to, going back all the way to that kind of Newton versus Einstein, that, it is this, it's a continuum, it's a wave, it's a spectrum, and yet we want to go binary, you're in this classification or this one.
Absolutely.
It's very material.
It is.
And it does. I mean, and then you're diagnosed or not diagnosed, and that, classification, identification, and.
And we've got to reset the rules because, at the moment, neurodiversity and, in particular, that has a stigma around it, and which is totally unreasonable. It's unfair on the people concerned, and I know from working up closely with them that they have a really tough time. But the truth is that underneath the surface here, you've got some very talented people. So, for instance, people with ADHD are often incredibly creative people. Because their minds bounce around, they don't fit into the rules of predictable, factory management styles, if you know what I mean. They don't behave themselves in a classic way. But if you can tap into that talent, they're incredibly creative people. And likewise, the apparent obsessive behavior of somebody with autism can be fantastic if you're looking for like rigor in research. Where one person's obsession is another person's passion. And if they passion, the key point is, do they enjoy it? And a lot of them, autistic people enjoy that, getting stuck into something and really following it through, So instead of it seeing as something that's unusual and we can't handle it, therefore it's bad, it's like, oh, this is actually how our brains are trying their best to adapt to the conditions we created. And we should be looking at this for the opportunities, not just the barriers. So you see, the whole link is our whole concept of what we are and who we are needs to evolve. And it needs to evolve quickly.
Like urgently.
Yeah.
There's a statistic that I love. I do think I know. I never remember the numbers in statistics.
No, that's a challenge.
But I think I have this one down, that in a day we consume as much information as someone did in a lifetime 500 years ago.
Yeah.
And when you think about, like, the newest part of our brain is 200,000 years old.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm suddenly quoting everyone numbers, having admitted to not being great with them. But, to give you an example, in the the evolution of ourselves and the incredibly rapid shift in our environment, there's going to be a discord. And as you're describing, I think that's a fascinating take on neurodivergency. And, so our sense of self needs a rethink, a reshape.
Now, there's an interesting concept, self, isn't it? So, what's neuroscience view on the self? Don't worry if I take on this conversation. Just keep asking myself questions now and answering them. So, basically, the neuroscience view of self is the tangible bit. It is no permanent structure in the brain that we could call the self. All cells regenerate. Typically within a couple of years or so in the brain, right across the body, I think in 7 years. So there's no biological presence of something we can call a self, right? Now, what you do with that information can go in different directions, but it certainly starts to throw a very different perspective on what the self might be. Certainly if people, as I think I originally had, was like, you arrive with some sort of self, and that self navigates its way through life as best it can.
When you say you arrive, you mean you are born, you arrive on Earth?
Yeah, right. There was some sort of genetic structure, wherever it is, or spiritual structure and then you navigate your way through life. But my view is different now. And now I think it's very much something that emerges. There is no doubt that we are unique. Every one of us is absolutely unique, okay? But whether we have a self at the beginning that navigates life is now highly debatable from the neuroscience perspective. We see it as an emergent, like streaming process where we are collecting, downloading intelligence and adding to that intelligence as we go through life. Now, it's important, as I've touched on before, that we maintain a sense of self, because if we have no sense of agency, then we think we can't do anything about it.
Yes, we touched on that.
And from an evolutionary point of view, that's a weak place to be, right? Because you're just a robot.
Yeah.
So you need to believe in a self. So belief itself then becomes an evolutionary function, right? So now we're starting to get a bit deep, right? So basically, I'm not saying the evidence shows there isn't a self, but I'm saying we can't take it for granted. And that's when we start to get in the debate about, okay, so is there anything that pre-exists? Does it go through life? And does it return at the end of life? Which takes us into spirituality. But for now, we're talking neuroscience, and we are saying our whole concept of self needs to be re-examined.
Whoa.
See, I said we didn't need words. We just need noises. I use my mammalian brain to interpret that noise, although I'm still a bit confused because my thinking brain's getting in the way.
Yes. So ever-changing cellular cluster. So the idea of any continual sense of self is impossible in that structure. There was something you talked...
Oh, don't say it's impossible. I'm saying it's up for question.
It's up for question.
Remember I talked about separation in an earlier conversation, and I was saying that there's this illusion that we're separate.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we've been taught, most of us, I think, is like you have to have a strong view of yourself. You have to have a real identity. So you put yourself out there, you're noticed, and you get on in life.
Yeah.
All right? Now, there's, as I said, an evolutionary benefit from that, undoubtedly. And identity is about, feeling you've got value in your community, etc. But is there a downside as well, which is, again, it breeds this whole idea of we're separate. And in the quantum world, we are not separate. We're all, whatever we end up doing affects us all. And that's so hard to get our life and our heads around. But that's the reality, in inverted commas, of the quantum world. Nothing is disconnected.
I got the tingle again.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you found it back. Well, I hope there's a few more tingles going on out there. There isn't just you and me having this conversation, But I can't sense them on the microphone
Two
yet.
tingles in a row. I really hope you're tingling out there too. Okay, so the self.
Yeah.
As a possibly less than constructive construct.
That's an interesting choice of words.
Yeah, it wasn't a great choice of words.
So I think I can...
Better with the sound.
Yeah. Just stick with the noises for when you're in that mood, yeah. No, I do, believe it or not, I do actually know what you're getting at, which is a bit worrying. But yeah, it's just something, open ourselves up, examine our current patterns of thought. This doesn't mean letting go of the things that we believe in deeply, but why should we be afraid of looking at those things? Yeah. Surely a belief that we're afraid to challenge is of no good to us. If you can't stand up to some rigor and some analysis, is it really a belief that serves us?
Yeah.
So, this, as I've said before, this hang-up of being right or wrong, it's just perspectives. The more we looked at this stuff, everything is about perspective, and how do we share those perspectives to come up with something better than we've got now?
Yeah, Clive, I think...
You need an ice bucket now, don't you?
My brain. So that's 3. That's episode 3 on neuroscience. And as we dance around this notion of self, I think it might be time to introduce our theme for episode 4.
Yeah.
Consciousness.
So you regained your rational brain there. You got through the emotional stuff, and it came back to you, didn't it? Just needed a bit more time.
It did.
Yeah.
It did.
So consciousness is where we've sort of been doing it, but we take more time to bring it all together now, because the role of consciousness is of intense interest to physicists in terms of the observation of the universe, which we talked about in that session.
Mm-hmm.
It's also of great interest to psychologists, obviously, and it's also very relevant from almost an evolutionary biology point of view, understanding how we've developed different levels of consciousness. So that's what we'll talk about next time, again with a view of trying to open up people's understanding of who we are.
Amazing, Clive.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And everyone, yes, thank you for listening. And we will see you for episode 4 of Timeless.